I'm sitting here with Mark Leota in Lafayette, California. This is Joe, and Mark is a philosophy guy from Bowling Green, Ohio, and Harvard. He spent a number of years working in the corporate world at IBM and Exxon, Western Union. He left the corporate world in 1981 to become a carpenter, and I'm sitting in his shop right now, drinking coffee on a rainy day. And he has since retired in 2016 and spends a lot of his time just knocking around here in the shop. And Mark and I have spent the last, 17 years talking about a number of things, not least of which the price of chocolate chip cookies. And so what I want to ask you today here, Mark, because this is one of the things for me in all the years and all the times that you and I have been talking about things that has left me and been the most resonant, and I think is probably a very relevant thing now post-pandemic, and the condition that the pandemic has left us as a people in terms of existential angst, if that's something that everyone can have. I think it is. I don't think you need to be an existentialist to have existential angst.
That's right.
And so my question to you is, what is it? What is meaning? And why is it so important for us to have it in our lives?
Because the natural state of our existence as suburban guys, married, etc., is to have a life that, unless we really try very hard to establish meaning, to seek meaning, to find meaning within ourselves, we get stuck easily in hurly-burly and mayhem of making a living and satisfying other people's demands. The basic reason why meaning matters is that a well-lived life is where everything matters. And meaning is how we derive what we usually call happiness. Happiness is pretty much a misnomer, I think. I've thought a lot about this over the last 3 years. I've been here in the wood shop just thinking about things like this. And I don't know anybody who is consistently happy. I know a lot of people who are consistently unhappy. But the people that have the most dramatic, exuberant lives are people who have found meaning. That is, what they do matters, what they think matters, the way they relate to other people matters. It answers to their preconceived interests in many cases, but they have found themselves now leading a life where almost everything matters. Now, in a world that is benignly indifferent to people's lives, and just go to the mall and tell me that's not true. I mean, we live this vacuous life. Now, let me say that Joe and I are both students of Jacob Needleman's, who's only been dead now for a few months, and went to his funeral the other day, a belated funeral. Needleman was my friend and teacher in graduate school at San Francisco State. And his basic thrust in one of his most beautiful books was, you get caught up in the hurly-burly and you're going to lose track of who you are. And so I don't know if that answers that, speaks to it, but you can tell someone for whom life matters because they have a kind of indwelling, internalized vigor for life. And you can also tell somebody who is despondent. Miguel de Unamuno said, you get to a moment of reckoning in your life where you make a choice, and the choice at that moment of reckoning is a life of sorrow or a life of gladness. The life of gladness is the life of meaning.
Give me an example of what meaning looks like to you personally and to people that you know, including your own family. And of course, there's no right or wrong answer to what gives meaning to one's life. But I think where people probably struggle to understand this, perhaps, is what it looks like to them. They may have it and not know it. They may have it and not understand how really important and valuable it is. talk about that a little
Well,
bit.
you lose track. You lose track because, again, of the mayhem of life, the cacophony of events drown out special moments.
Mm.
And special moments is where it all makes sense to you. I was just in Hawaii with my son and his family and my wife, and we went to the beginning of the Ironman race in Kailua Kona, where you start swimming at the pier, and I hadn't been there in 15 years. My son and I used to do the Ironman stuff, and he was good and I was a hanger-on. And I turned to him tearfully and said that the most meaningful things in my life were things he prompted me to do, that I said, I don't have the time, I can't sacrifice the money out of my business to do this. And now that I'm an old man, I couldn't be happier that I did all the things you suggested that I do. So, do I owe you one? Yeah, I owe you one. And I was dead serious. I was standing there looking at the ocean, and where 1,500 people jumped in the water and swam, and I decided that I never would have done any of that without him. Now, he knew something I didn't know, and that was, he knew that all I was doing was working. Since he was a little kid, that's what he saw me do. And then when I quit in 1982, he was a teenager, and we played basketball every day for a year. And I decided that I wanted to fully live my life rather than be lived by it, and ride the train into San Francisco and tell people about business machines. It's a thing for which I'm eternally grateful. The meaning of it is obvious. It brought a kind of richness to the moment and to my life generally. To think that I would have maybe not done that if I were left to my own devices.
So tell me, you've asked me this question a number of times, and I've struggled for an answer that I would have felt to be worthy of the question, if there is a worthy answer. It's person specific, of course, but tell me what it is that people perhaps look at that they believe does give meaning to their lives, but doesn't really answer to that criteria of meaning. It sounds like I'm saying there's, again, I prefaced it with there not being a right or wrong answer, but there are errors, I suppose, in what it is that people believe are things that are meaningful to them that really aren't, perhaps. Like, oh, I work at a job where we keep the air clean, so I mean that does serve a social utility and it is meaningful, I suppose, but is it meaningful to the person? What gives meaning to said person? What are the errors that people might commit in terms of their own self-philosophy when it comes to believing that there's something that actually is meaningful where really it's not as meaningful as they believe it to be, and might find themselves later in life thinking, wow, how did I miss this and how did I miss that?
Well, that's an interesting thing. The example I like to use is an example from my friend Tanya, who is this extremely wealthy, successful investment person in Los Angeles, as is her husband. Just made it on her own, hard scrabble, learned the investment business. And she's this wonderful woman. And she's had a bunch of health challenges in the last 10 years or so that kept her out of the business world. But we were in a car. She bought a car. This is maybe 15 years ago. One of those cars with a little television set on the dashboard. Now that's fairly routine, but at the time it was pretty exotic. And I was in the front seat, and my wife was in the back seat, and Tanya was driving, and we were in a place called Marina del Rey. I have no idea where it is, somewhere in Los Angeles on the ocean. And I said to her, what is this? And she said, well, it's a Mercedes-Benz, and the higher the number on the fender, on the back bumper is, or on the back trunk, the more it costs. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And why did you buy it? This woman's like a daughter to me, so I can ask her blunt questions like that. She said, well, I always wanted a Mercedes because I always thought that it would really matter, and I would feel so good about having made all this money and bought this magnificent car with a television set on the dashboard, right? And I said, well, how do you feel about it now? And she said, well, for the first 2 weeks, it was pretty exciting. I mean, it smelled new and it was fun to drive, etc. And then it just became a car. And I thought, isn't that emblematic of what happens in life when we try to find meaning that inheres itself in things? Because meaning is really a state of one's mind. It's tied to how you look at the world. But things become disappointing, and ideas never really become disappointing, I don't think.
Yeah.
At least in the same way that things become disappointing. You know how it is. We used to say in college in the 60s, a Madras shirt and a Mustang. If you had a Mustang car and a Madras shirt, you were on top of the world. And you combine that with being exempt from the draft, if you could somehow get that lucky, and then a Madras shirt and a Mustang. Didn't matter anything. I never had a Mustang, and I guess I had a Madras shirt many years ago. But you know, they extinguish. These things are temporary moments of exhilaration, and they extinguish. So what does matter? What matters are human relations. It matters, the most important thing that matters, I think, as you get older is relationships. That the opposite of despair is connected. And you don't want to live a life of despair and regret. You don't want to look back on your life, as Thoreau said in Walden, and somewhere about page 80. He said, you don't want to look back on your life and find out that you'd never really lived, and that you had been lived by your life. It's one of the most enchanting paragraphs in all of American literature. And it's true, isn't it? You don't want to get old and say, boy, I wish I would have done the Ironman triathlon, or I wish I would have taken that trip with my son or daughter, or my wife. I wish I would have done this. You don't want to have those kind of regrets.
So tell me now, at this point in your life, with the time that you have lived and the time that you have on hand to do the things now that, you know, there's nothing constraining you, work or obligations, your children are grown, you live with your wife, your house is paid for, you have this nice shop, you have friends. What is it now in your life today that gives the most meaning to you and brings you the most happiness and contentment?
Understanding. I seek to understand things that I have not understood in the past. It may sound sort of ephemeral, but really, I came to understand some things about time and space in the last 3.5 years that I'd always wondered about. And I didn't want to go to my grave thinking that they were still these open-ended questions for which I had very little insight, if any. And also, I made a real breakthrough one day here in the wood shop about how you learn things. Basically, you pivot off other things you know. I know some logical problems with that, but that's the best I can usually do with an original idea. I only had about 3 original ideas in my life, and one of them was, if you have a teenage son who's sort of lost, and one could hardly blame somebody 16 years old for being lost in this kind of world, that help him buy a pickup truck and teach him how to go to the dump and teach him how to be a business person like you, who had to scramble to try and figure out how to do things. And it's just, I think, a great idea, not just because I'm dreaming it up, but you buy your kid, a 16-year-old kid, a pickup truck. First of all, you can only put 2 of his buddies in the front seat, and it's not likely to be a chick magnet car like a BMW or something like this fancy high school where you went, right near here,
Mhm.
where kids have BMWs and Alfa Romeos. I mean, nonsense like that. Who would ever buy their kid a $40,000, $50,000 car? But buy the kid a $2,000 pickup truck and teach him how to work on it, and then go out and see if anybody has anything that needs to go to the dump. It's not advanced marketing, but I think it's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
It may sound trivial, but it's not trivial, because we're really talking about boys, and could be girls. You know, I haven't thought that through, but boys having a sense of agency over their lives,
Mm.
because that's what's really wrong with being a teenager. You're being told what to do by everybody, and you're a guy who never listened to any of them, and you were right.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that.
Thoreau also said that too. He said, "Beware of the advice of old people."
Yeah.
You know, except this is of course the exception, right? I'm giving advice and I'm old, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's all about agency over your life.
Pretty damn good, and I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about this here today, and I'm sure we're going to meet up again and talk about something else again. This is Mark Leota, and thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Joe.